Okay, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you and good evening to those of you who may be joining us from overseas. Welcome to the New Champion Dialogues 2022. Now, this morning's session discusses a very exciting topic, which is the Metaverse. It's great to have you join us to explore the frontiers of Metaverse technology and the latest applications that will take us into the next stage of digital development. Now, ask a handful of people about the metaverse. You'll get a dozen different responses, ranging from a virtual land of opportunity to the new Facebook, which is now called Meta, or technology jargons like Web3, NFT, blockchain, and VR. And some even call it the future of the internet and predict that's where we're going to be spending most of our time. And what's clear is that there isn't quite a clear definition of the metaverse, since it is still in very early stages and is still evolving. So let me begin by sharing with you what I think the metaverse is. The metaverse is perhaps the promise of a virtual community with the potential to allow people to play, work, socialize, and transact. And with the right hardware, it can be an immersive experience. Strap on a pair of VR glasses and your 3D digital avatar can do virtual equivalents of real-world activities, like exploring artwork in a museum, attending a concert, discussing work around a virtual conference table, etc. Now, without further ado, let's dive into today's panel discussion. I'll introduce to you our speakers today. Now, first of all, my name is Nancy Ju. I'm a news anchor and talk show host based in Beijing. I'm also a media leader and a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. It's very nice to host this session on the opening day of the New Champion Dialogues. Our first panelist, let me introduce to you, is Mr. Chen Qiufan, who is the Chief Creative Officer of Thema Mandai Studio. He's also a culture leader, award-winning writer, and co-author of the book AI 2041. And our second panelist is Mr. Yat Su, chairman of Animoca Brands. And I think people in the industry will be very familiar with Mr. Su, who's dubbed Mr. Metaverse by the media. Animoca Brands has made more than 150 investments in Web3 and Metaverse projects. We also have our final panelist who may be joining us a bit later on. I think she's having some internet connection issues. Dr. Hoda Al-Kazemi, who is the Assistant Research Professor of Engineering Department of New York University, Abu Dhabi, UAE. She has a PhD in crypto analysis and has a particular interest in emerging technology investments and the use of emerging technology to expand emerging economies and democratizing technology development. Okay, well, I'm going to talk you through how we're going to get through today's panel discussion. So we're going to have 3 rounds of discussion today. We'll begin by having our 3 panelists share their vision on the metaverse, and then we're going to have them introduce the current development of the industry, and finally talk about the regulations, rules, and collaboration between the public and private sectors and international collaboration. So let's first of all get into our round 1 of discussion, which is to share the vision on metaverse. Okay, Mr. Chen Qiufan, Mr. Yat Su, what do you see the metaverse in 10 years' time? How do you think it's going to shape our ways of life, work, education, and entertainment? Who would like to get us started?
Well, maybe I'll start quickly from... Oh, go ahead, Chen. Please go ahead.
Qiufan, please, yes.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy, and really glad to meet everyone here because like in 2018 and 2019, I was like in personally and anticipated the World Economic in Tianjin and Dalian. So glad to be back, even in a virtual way. So I think in the book, AI 2041, we have several stories tap into the immersive environment and experience in the next 20 years. So there's some stories actually talking about like how we're gonna coexist with technologies such as AR, VR, XR, and also like digital humans, there'll be an important part of our entertaining industry, because maybe we'll have all these characters, even celebrities, they'll be created and generated and driven by AI. And also we can see the Unreal Engine right now is super powerful. It can generate all of like cinematic realistic imageries and animations. So even like human beings couldn't like telling which one is real, which one is not by their bare eyes. So I think in the next 10 years, probably the biggest bottleneck is the hardware, like because we all know that right now the current devices we're using is mostly like VR goggles, the batteries and the rendering capabilities, and also the latency issues there is so restrictedly keeping us away from that kind of like science fictional metaverse imagination. So I think like maybe there'll be some like technological breakthrough on display and also the batteries, so they can have everyone have this kind of like very easy carrying small scale of device like our mobile phone. And on that like level of mass market electronic devices, I think probably we will live in that kind of world, like everyone sharing the same virtual working, living, social, educational environment across different platforms for sure. But I have to amplify, because Metaverse is not only about the content we consume, but also about the infrastructure underneath everything. So when we're talking about Metaverse, you couldn't neglect like crypto, Web3, and even the community as DAO, like decentralized autonomy organization. So that's how holding everyone, like all the users together with the same belief and consensus, then they gonna build something. And I think this kind of tokenomics is also something we need to look into, because right now everything seems like the market is like diving, and also there's so many regulation emerging from different market. So I have not so positive like expectation on the next 10 years. So I think probably there'll be some big platforms such as Meta. There'll be like conquering the market like across entertainment and working and maybe socialing, but I think that's very limited. So that's my expectation on the next 10 years.
Okay, thank you very much, Chilpan. I think you have mentioned technology, hardware breakthrough. You also mentioned we need to have the same beliefs, consensus, infrastructure, which is also very important. You mentioned regulations, and you concluded by saying you're not very positive in terms of having sort of what kind of expectations we can achieve by the end of this decade, which I think is very interesting because Meta is obviously very positive about achieving even a better world than the one we currently have. So thank you. Thank you very much for beginning this discussion. Mr. Yatsu, what's your take on this? What's your vision in the next 10 years?
Great. Well, thank you for this. Well, I would say that before we even start with 10 years, because we think the changes, in our view, will be radical. And they'll be even more radical than the way that the internet has developed over the last 20 years, or how mobile has affected us in the last 10 years. And the reason we believe that is because, in our view, the metaverse, as in the true metaverse, because there's some distinctions. What Facebook is building with Meta, or as they renamed themselves Meta, we view as a fake metaverse. And the reason we think it's fake is because nobody can actually own it. So the big difference on this one is that data basically being the natural resource of the metaverse is one that needs to be owned by the users. It needs to be retained, and end users need to have sovereignty over it. But in the current structure that is basically in Web 2, and the kind of platforms that Facebook or Google would like you to exist in, actually all the data belongs to them. And by that, I don't mean data in and of itself, because we can have our photos and we can have our identities, but it's a derivative value of that data. After all, data is the most powerful resource on Earth today. It has the ability to construct limitless network effects. It is the reason why places, as well as in Europe and in China, people are trying to control the power of these very centralized companies that essentially sort of have the ability to control and manipulate essentially communities, because they have insights into the knowledge and data that actually we don't have. And the paradigm to change this, in our view, is property rights. And the way to get property rights is basically through blockchain, because blockchain is the way in which data becomes a public good as opposed to being a private good in the way that it is. And in the same way that property rights or private property rights in society has essentially not just established incredible sort of economic opportunities, but also strong personal rights, basically the same thing we believe will happen in the digital world. And so things like AR and VR are all important to experience the metaverse, but they're not the metaverse in itself. Because just like in the physical world, we don't necessarily measure our identities entirely based on just experiences. They form a part of us. But basically, having sovereignty over our own identity is what's important. And if you think about our physical, digital life, our actual physical life today, how much do we do digitally today? It's probably the majority of our time. First thing we do in the morning is probably do something online. Most of the day, basically before we go to sleep, we probably play some games and talk to people online. Effectively, we are already metaversal creatures, you could say, except that time that you spend there isn't really yours. It belongs to someone else, and they basically mine it. And our view is that we're basically being digitally colonized by these digital kingdoms who basically just, all of us who use Facebook or who use Google or who use Tencent or whatever product we use, we think that we're in fact working for them every day for free. And the true metaverse is the one where we work for ourselves. And so 10 years down the road, we will have data sovereignty because we have the ability to own our data. Regulation will come into play, not only to give us the identities, but also for governments themselves to realize that data property is actually the more powerful way to control and give more liberties to their citizens. And it will have a massive, massive impact and change in the way it works, not necessarily in the visual experience, but in actual fundamental sort of personal liberties and freedoms, as well as economic opportunities that we can now have, because all the time we spend online should be paid. After all of us, we contribute value to the network effects of the Facebooks and the Googles and the Tencents of the world. If we don't use it, the value of their service, their communities is not worth anything. So why are we giving our time and data for free? It's because we don't know what it's worth. We're being arbitraged out of our time, right? After all, back in the early days of the internet, the farmer in China was able to determine the true price of rice because he was able to see what it was sold in America. The problem is that data, which is the resource, the commodity of the metaverse, is we don't know what it means to us because nobody tells us what it's worth. That's why it needs to be public. That's why it needs to be on chain. If I can know what my data is worth on Facebook, probably $50 to $100 or whatever it is, then I would demand my fair share of that value, right? And that is the meaning of property rights.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Yatsu, for sharing with us your insights, which I think is very interesting, that Meta's vision of the metaverse is actually fake. What will make it real is if everybody who uses the metaverse actually own part of it, which is, I think, the key term of your insights just now, property rights, which is very, very important. And I think decentralization is another key word. When we have the participants of the metaverse who can actually work for ourselves rather than, working for these tech giants, that's when the metaverse is the true metaverse. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Maybe just to add this one point, sorry, just to interrupt, but when you say, it's an important point to say decentralized, because decentralization means that you now have the ability for people to grow together with others and through the work of others on top of it, right? Meaning that, today ownership in the physical world is the reason that you're able to construct and innovate new businesses in a permissionless fashion. So the key is that it's permissionless, right? The fact that there are millions of car owners in the world today is a reason we can have Uber or Didi. Is a reason you can have someone
Recording stopped.
create a
Recording
car
in
services
progress.
company, right? That's the main thing, right? And the decentralization means that the power structure basically is distributed as opposed to controlled by a single one. Right now, for instance, if you want to launch an app on the App Store, well, you have to ask permission from Apple, and it's up to them to decide whether you can actually exist on it. And even a company the size of Epic, the creators of Unreal, are unable to launch their top game on Apple. Now, how is that right?
Okay, excellent. Very interesting. I think we're going to definitely hear more from Yat in the next 20 minutes about his view on the metaverse and probably explain some of these thoughts in detail. But I'm going to move on to the next question, which is more about technologies. What do you think are the most cutting-edge technologies that's central to the operation of the metaverse? I think Qiufan has mentioned VR-based wearables, also artificial intelligence. I can also think of AR, augmented reality, which is very important, and brain-computer interface, which is sort of the ultimate technology, some say. What do you think are the most important technologies? Qiufan, what's your take on this?
I mean, all of them are very important. If we really want to actualize the metaverse in the imagination of science fiction, just like we play Radio One, but also as Yachu mentioned, decentralization is so important. But the current blockchain capabilities and efficiency doesn't strong enough to holding the trading and transaction it's pretty slow. Sometimes there's so many glitches, so it's super bad on user experience. So if we really want to actualize that version of metaverse, so I think we're talking about the upgrade of Ethereum to 2.0. But it took so long to make it happen. So everyone is looking forward to that, but nobody really know what's going to happen because it's a huge shifting. So I mean, there's so many technology. To me, it's like doing the puzzle. Each piece of them could be determinist. And I think the most important part, for now, is the computation power. And also, is causing the carbon emission during the whole process, the rendering, trading, putting everything on the chain, and everything is it seems to me is not very sustainable.
Okay, thank you, Qiufan. And Yat, what's your view? What are you most excited about?
Well, I mean, I think to Qiufan's point, I mean, many of the technologies that make sort of digital ownership work are obviously not as efficient as they could be. But I view it a little bit like sort of, the state of the internet, say, 25 years ago, right? Meaning that, when we first went onto the internet and we had a dial-up and we went onto a browser, it wasn't a particularly exciting experience. But still, it brought millions of people there. And what brought them there wasn't the fact that the state of the technology was obviously mature. I mean, that's what brought billions of people there. But the hundreds of millions of people joined because of the fact that they saw a better future, not just for themselves, but for others, right? When people spoke about the internet, back 25 years ago or so, right? They didn't speak of the wonderful sort of, 3D experiences that they could have, right? In fact, they were impossible. They spoke of the fact that they could have access to information, that they could have freedom of access of information. They have more knowledge, have more of these things that actually mean something in terms of deeper insights as people, as communities, as societies, as humans. And I think that's what ownership does as well. And that's why we consider, Metaverse and Web3 and blockchain so heavily intertwined. Right? They are connected to this because it is that next level where we have ownership and we have those relationships, that deeper connections that we can have, where we truly own a piece of it, where we also have the ability to decide what to do with it. And we can interact and connect with these communities in a much more powerful level. So we think blockchain is the fundamental structure. And we don't say it's a fundamental structure because it's the technological structure. Things like Unreal or versions of Unreal or Unity, whichever, are going to create ways in which we can experience it nicely. We think of these as better technologies, right? But the fundamental of the fact that there is a community consensus within any community, right, which is possible to blockchain in a manner where there isn't a central power, where there is a an anti-monopolistic quality about Web3 because of the distribution of the ownership of the on-chain of the communities. That to us is what's powerful, and why more and more people are driven towards this is, again, the hope of a better internet, a hope of a more decentralized web, a hope of basically more fairer opportunities for those who are basically engaging online. Because today it is not fair. It was fair in its construction, in its hope 3 decades ago when everyone went online, but because of the centralized platforms, whether this be Meta or Google or whichever, and the dependencies we have on them, it no longer is. Right? And so this to us is the fundamental. And so blockchain is advancing very quickly, despite the volatility. I think the way to interpret blockchain is that they are mimicking communities and societies at large. And so like any community and society, that we have experienced that have gone through rapid growth, as well as exuberance and excitement, there's volatility, right? This is the very first time where technology in and of itself is intertwined with an economic consensus, as well as one that can somehow measure community, right? This is very different from Web 1 and Web 2, and why Web 3 is so powerful. But because it has this measurable economic mechanism inside it, it also has this volatility. So that's just something to bear in mind. But we're very excited about where blockchain will go. We recognize it will take some time, but we think it's going to be much sooner than we think. Meaning that in the next few years, we think there's going to be 300 to 500 million people basically on this type of open metaverse as we describe it.
Okay, well, the next 3 to 5 years, that could come very soon. You talked about blockchain, you talked about community consensus. I think there's definitely a lot to look forward to. Access to information, freedom of access to information, all these are very, very important. Now, let's move on. After we shared our vision of the metaverse in the next decade, let's talk about the current development of the industry. Well, I think the main engines of the metaverse development are likely to be the giant tech companies, whether you like it or not. And in China, that would be the BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and overseas companies such as Meta and Microsoft. And they've all got a head start towards the development of metaverse. So how would you describe the development of metaverse over the past year, both globally and in Asia? What do you think are the major trends and milestones?
Well, I mean, maybe I'll quickly start on this one. Yeah. Sure. So first of all, I actually, I certainly hope not, but I don't think that the major tech companies, at least in the West, like Meta, are actually going to be the winners in this space. Now, I'm not only saying this because obviously we're investing in potential competitors, or that we own the Sandbox, for instance, which is, one of the largest, I guess, sort of open metaverses on blockchain, and obviously very opposed to the idea of a closed metaverse, which is what Facebook/Meta is driving for. But in any event, the reason we don't believe this is they're going to succeed is because the business model of an open metaverse, where people own the data and have sovereignty over this, where the data is decentralized and end users have power over it, is actually not one that is compatible with the tech giants of today, because they derive their value from a monopolistic mind share of your time and data. So everything they do is to try to ensure that you stay there. They build moats, they build mechanisms in which it's expensive for you to leave, right? And I think this is something that is not going to succeed in the long run. And I see it a little bit like how, at the end of the day, closed source lost to open source, right? For those of you who remember, in the early days of the internet, actually Sun Microsystems and Microsoft and all of the tech giants still were pushing closed source. The idea was, well, if I would share my code, then everyone would just build a competitor, and oh dear, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And yet today, open source is the dominant form in which code is shared, and is the reason why we have global innovation, is the reason why companies like Huawei and Lenovo also exist, because they were able to develop on Android and adapt it and use it, because they had the mindshare and the wisdom to work from the millions and millions of coders around the world that were then able to share this. And this opportunity doesn't just exist for the privileged who have access and money, but also to the countries and places that didn't have access to this because they had the ability to access this code, right? So we think ownership is that principal sort of thought as well. And so the big platforms won't succeed unless they go open, which is possible, right? But of course, they have, a classic innovator's dilemma. And I do believe that, for instance, someone like Mark Zuckerberg understands this very well. He is not only saying, oh, let's go ahead and sort of rename Facebook to Meta, which in itself is bold. For those who may remember, he had tried to build a cryptocurrency with Libra. He had done many other things around blockchain, which has been halted because of their sort of big influence and, frankly, the fact that a lot of people don't trust Facebook, because after all, there's been some abuses in the past. But as an example, this is a person who does understand, I think, where the future is going, who does look at blockchain very seriously. He was just not allowed to navigate in quite the same way, right? Now, I do think there will be regional differences because of, China's position, which is positive from blockchain, but not positive from crypto. And so deriving the differences between that is going to give, as it has with the internet, a Chinese-style flavor in China, which is going to be different, right? Which is not to say what is right or what is wrong, just it's going to be different, as the internet has also developed differently, but still connected to the global web in a certain shape or form. But I think China is one of the few places that can afford to be different, right? Most countries and societies and communities are just too small, right? And they have to join the global economy as they join the global internet, as they join the WTO, in order to be able to sort of actually continue to navigate in this connected world.
Okay, well, you made a distinction between closed metaverse and open-sourced metaverse. Meta being the sort of dominant example of closed metaverse at the moment, and you saying they will not necessarily succeed unless they go open. And the key of being open is that all participants will be owners, and they will have property rights in the metaverse. You also talked about the differences and similarities between the Chinese market and the overseas market, and how China can afford to be different, which I think is absolutely true. Are you aware that Shanghai is presenting a new plan to turn itself into an important metaverse center?
Yes, I'm also aware that many countries around the world are trying to do the same thing, whether it's Saudi, whether it's UAE, even Japan's prime minister recently talked about Web3 and the metaverse as a national agenda. So it's a global thing for sure, which is exciting. I do want to add one point as distinction. Maybe this is maybe the more important one that I forgot to mention is one of the reasons we think it's very hard for closed metaverses to succeed is because the economic framework is just multiple times smaller because it's a rental economy. Right, so in a closed metaverse, the main way to monetize an end user's time is, advertising, right? Which means that we as end users are worth maybe dollars or clicks per maybe cents per, in terms of our time. So we're not really as valuable. And part of it is because it's permissioned, because there's only one utility, maybe a few that a central organization determines. When you open up any framework with property rights, it doesn't have to just be digital. You open up an economy. When you open an economy, new permissionless innovations construct on top of it. And capital formation begins that you can't do in a closed system. So for instance, in the physical world, the fact that I can own a house is a reason that a bank can give you a 20 or 30-year mortgage. because they know that you own a house and the government that they're in is stable, and there's an ability to create capital formation from that. But if you never own the house, if you can only ever rent it, then you can never actually have a capital formation, which means that the only one who can have capital formation is the owner. In this case, maybe Meta, right? That Instagram handle that you cultivated for 10 years that might have 10 million followers, you don't own that. Maybe you think you do. The gamers who basically added all the network effects into the games and made them valuable, those virtual assets, they believe they own it. All the gamers around it think they own it, but in reality, of course, they don't. So that means without the distribution, you have the effect of a kingdom. And we know how kingdoms operate economically, not very strong compared to decentralized free economies. So when you look at it that way, an end user that is worth dollars for Facebook in the open metaverse is worth thousands because of the capital formation. It's the reason why NFTs in the West have had these large price discoveries, despite market gyrations, still worth more than the equivalent non-open metaverse or digital asset, right? It may not be worth 100,000, it's still worth tens of thousands. The point being that because you have those economic sort of capital formations that you can do that. Now, how do you compete as a central platform economically in one platform where an end user can literally make 100 to 200 times more for their time, right? Versus another one. Over time, it just doesn't make sense. Why do people go to the App Store? Because they can make more money on the App Store than they go in another way, as an example. That will change when there's better ways to do that. It's why people, for the time being, go to the Sandbox and Decentraland, because they can launch products. And they don't need to have millions of customers to be successful. They can just have thousands or tens of thousands because they can have the benefits of these capital formations. And that's the main reason why we invest so heavily in everything that's open metaverse and why we believe open is the only path in this particular case.
Okay, open is the only path to a successful metaverse. Thank you very much, Yat. I'm going to see if Qiufan and Hoda have anything to add to the topic we just discussed. Hoda, are you there? Dr. Hoda? I think we may have lost her. So Qiufan, do you have anything to add in terms of the current development of metaverse and perhaps the similarities and differences between the different markets?
I totally agree with Yat. So I mostly focus on content and creator economy. So even the crypto market is going down, but the NFT assets is still like price like skyrocketing. And also like not only like a fancy decoration of NFT, but also like utility of NFT, like traditional companies like Nike, they purchase like a NFT company artifact. So because they can treat the NFT sneakers in the metaverse, they can give like their customers more value. So also a lot of like traditional artists, writers, that's me, and also filmmakers, they start to embracing the crypto and Web3 industry, and also all those luxury brands. They start to doing the marketing and communication with their users with this kind of new way of technology. So I can see this kind of things is like emerging in different places, different markets, even like in China, because we all know the regulation there is forbidden the NFT to be trading like openly, but still the companies like the traditional industry and brands, they're really eager to use this kind of new concept to engaging with the younger generation. So I think there's huge possibilities and opportunities out there. So the only way, just like Yats mentioned, is the openness.
Okay, openness, and people and brands and companies in different parts of the world are really embracing this new technology and eager to use it to their benefit. Thank you very much. Thank you, Yat, and thank you, Qiufan. Is Hoda back online? Checking to see if she's back with us. Okay, well, if not, let's move on. My next question to you, gentlemen, would be, do you think these technologies and innovations can be applied to other industries and create other business opportunities and new business models?
Well, maybe I'll start. We just literally 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had acquired a company called TinyTap. And TinyTap is a teacher marketplace. And what TinyTap does is it makes content from other teachers and sells it to other teachers or parents or educators. And it's really, basically, you wouldn't say it is particularly sort of high-priced items. It's like a math curriculum or like, language curriculum or, whatever, right? And teachers make supplemental income, maybe a couple $100. Some make tens of thousands of dollars, but most of them make just a couple $100 or maybe $1,000 sort of, a year on this, which is a nice supplemental income to their primary job. However, once we introduce NFTs in which you have property rights over these assets, you have the ability, just like with NFT artists, to start sharing royalties and distribution value across, which means you can allow capital formation on these assets. It means that if a teacher who makes maybe just $1,000 a year on a piece of content, it allows for another person to buy this content, knowing that it makes $1,000 a year, and possibly for what might be a 10% yield, buy it for $10,000. Now, you don't change a teacher's life dramatically by giving them $1,000 a year for 10 years, but you do change it when you give them $10,000 in one go, which is what happened with NFT artists and which happened with gamer time. And so this is happening with education now, and we think with every single industry. So I think to us, Web3, the metaverse, and property rights, the formation of all of that is the fundamental aspect here. Because every industry, we don't think there can be any industry that doesn't touch data, that doesn't have the ability to greatly benefit the creators of this data. So we're focusing on education because we think teachers and educators are amongst the largest content creators in the world, but they are also the ones that are sort of least paid for their effort, shall we say. So we think there is an opportunity. But I'm sure that everyone here can think of 1,000 other ways in which you have data form of some value, whether it's research, whether it's ideas, whether it's something in your company that could benefit from this data formation, from this capital formation inside data, and more fairly distributed. Because even here, because it's on-chain, we don't need a special DRM. We don't need a central platform. When the data is sold from one party to another, it distributes the income fairly across both the creator, the platform, and maybe the co-owner. So there's many ways that you can probably think about sort of creating this open value of data trade that everyone can partake in. But just illustrating one such example, which has been fairly new because most people haven't connected education with digital property rights, but is one such example.
Okay, great. Very meaningful application, I think, of the technology. Every industry has data, and I'm sure a lot of people can think of ways where data can be used with capital formation, just like Yat just mentioned. Does Shufan have anything to add to this topic?
I think another huge changing phenomenon is happening in game industry. For example, GameFi, because the model of play to earn is actually become so popular. Like even GameFi as like Exit Infinity in Philippines is supporting so many people when they're losing their day job, so they can make some money while playing the game. So I think this kind of new pattern is totally like I'm shaking the traditional game industry, and also like because we put everything on chain, so the data, the privacy, the IDs of the gamers, they can be better protected. And I can see there's so huge possibilities, like for example, like Travis Scott, he holding this super successful virtual concert in Fortress 9. So I think this is something definitely will happen in the coming years, because like pandemic is accelerating everything online and even go virtually. So this kind of experience might better connecting people, even they're separated from geographically, and also like across different platforms. So I think this kind of thing is a game changer. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, great. Seems like it's a technology that can be applied to many industries and a lot of people can benefit from. Let's move on quickly to our discussion round 3. Is Hoda back online with us? Checking again if Dr. Hoda's back online with us. Okay, let's move on. I think Yat and Chilfan is going to be able to share with us their insights as well on this round. Well, I think Metaverse is still in the process of rapid development and formation, and there's currently no legal framework specially designed for the Metaverse. So future rules will need to clarify the respective rights of Metaverse projects, developers, and players, and define the rights related to these properties and digital assets, which Yat repeatedly mentioned. So I want to move on to talk a little bit about the regulations, rules, standards, international cooperation. Would Yat please begin?
Sure. So I think regulation is basically a when, not if, right? And I think there's multiple avenues of how regulation should, I think, approach in this one. And we're working very closely with, at least in communication with many of the financial authorities. It's one of those big questions, right? Which is, well, if you, for instance, regulate NFTs, then do you regulate art as well? Do you regulate trading cards? Where's the sort of, balance and difference? And because, at least in the West, the intersection between non-fungible tokens, the properties and assets of the metaverse, is so connected to crypto broadly because people do use crypto to trade in them, right? There are the financial regulatory aspects that need to be respected, whether this is KYC and AML, whether this is basically sort of, looking at sort of, the value of these currencies, all these things that can have an impact in this. So I think that definitely the world is moving towards regulating the currencies because that's obviously the more urgent and more systemic one. And a lot of work is done in this one. Now, for the property rights, I do believe there will be also regulation. But I think the regulation that we would like to see, and obviously many of them are not currently focused on NFTs because it's not considered systemic and frankly a bit complex. They have to deal with one issue first before they can deal with the other. But what we would like to see is essentially giving real airtime to property rights as one that is in digital property rights. So right now, in all of our laws, property rights is given a lot of respect and time, right? Someone can't just walk over your property, despite the fact that you have maybe an unfair agreement, right? And you may have a contract, but if it basically abuses your property rights, then the law essentially protects your property rights around this. One of the reasons why many of the big platforms can get away with what we consider these incredible data abuses is because data doesn't exist as a legal framework yet. There is no data property rights framework. So they're trying to address it in form of privacy. They're trying to address it in the form of sort of, control, but not really in terms of giving maybe more power to the end users. I think the whole world will change radically if suddenly all end users actually have property rights over the data.
I'm here. Can you hear me, Nancy?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to interrupt you. I apologize, because Dr. Holder is back online. I think we're going to ask her a question. Dr. Holder, are you online?
Yes, I am online. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. I can hear you. I'm going to ask you a question, which is going to be your area of research regarding
Nancy,
technology inequality.
I'm sorry, I think I'm joined from another line. If they can just cut that line off. That's another delayed link because I was responding to you earlier.
Nancy, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, the technical. Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask this question, Dr. Holder. Regarding technology inequality, how can we make sure these metaverse technology breakthroughs and applications can benefit most people?
Thank you, Nancy, for the question. That's a very fundamental question. And I think, as my colleagues here on the panel highlighted earlier, the way we build the technology has to be catastrophically changing. The way we build the metaverse has to be moving towards not just centralized approaches. There shouldn't be one metaverse that's based on centralized technology, but also a decentralized metaverse that would allow users for this kind
Nancy,
of digital sovereignty.
I'm here.
And
Can you hear me, Nancy?
I think we have an issue here with the technical aspects. I'm really sorry for this.
No problem.
comes to digital sovereignty, it goes beyond just the right of owning your data and the right of monetizing every aspect of your data using blockchains or using the underlying cryptocurrency. Sorry. There is a delayed interaction here, so every time you called my name and I'm responding, I think. So going back to that, when we are building egalitarian technology, we should allow users to design the space or co-design the space with us. We should allow users to own the data, as we have just discussed, and we build a holistic framework of regulation around it. And as well, we allow the users to use open source technologies to code and co-design these technologies. When we're talking about a metaverse environment, it's a realistic representation of reality. And for this, you need a fusion structures when it comes to the input. It shouldn't be just the input of the developer, but also the input of the designers, who should be the common users of the platforms as well. And towards this, we're talking about the aspects of creating value. How can we use the metaverse, for example, to share energy across the world? If one part of the world is generating excess amount of energy, can we transfer that energy to another part of the world where they don't have it? So can we use the metaverse platform to trade real assets that will provide egalitarian livelihood for people around the structure? So it goes from the understanding of how can we build an equal egalitarian design and development and analysis of the metaverse to as well providing equal access change within the metaverse itself. Thank you, Nancy.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hoda, for your insights, and thank you, Yat and Chil-Fan as well. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time left, so we're going to end the session here. I'm going to just conclude by saying, for the moment, we're still some way from Matthew Bohr's definition of the metaverse. I think better hardware, clearer standards, as you all mentioned, and more powerful infrastructure will all be needed for metaverse to flourish in the way that we envision. And properly designed, it could emerge as a new platform for education, for entertainment, for work, and much else besides. One of the biggest challenges or opportunities could be how to ensure interoperability between the different metaverses, how to ensure that they are open, and collaboration between the public and private sectors and international cooperation will also be important to ensure that there is technology equality. Developers, entrepreneurs, consumers, governments, and regulators must all do their bit to design the metaverse worth creating. Well, according to many, according to Yat, certainly today, by the end of this decade, we'll all agree the metaverse has arrived. So we better make sure we build it the right way. So thank you very much again, our panelists, Mr. Chen Chil-Fan, Mr. Yat Siu, and Dr. Hoda Al-Kazemi. Thank you for your time and for your wonderful insights. Thank you all our participants online for joining this live streaming session. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy the rest of this year's Champion Dialogues. Best wishes to you all. I'm Nancy Ju from Beijing. Goodbye.